Difference or sum of two cubes. I got to make the decision here. The difference of two cubes is what we're going to use here. Whoops. As I say that, and then I write a plus sign. All right. A cubed minus B cubed. So we're going to use this formula. A minus B, A squared plus AB plus B squared. Okay? Now, my A value from 27x cubed is 3x. My B value from 64 equaling B cubed is 4. And from here, you're just plugging it in. 3x minus 4. We have to square the quantity 3x squared. That's 9x squared plus 12x, A times B, plus the B squared, which is 16, or 4 squared. And that is your answer. The second one, you're just factoring. Once again, you don't have to get the zeros if there's no equal sign. 4 terms, I'm going to break this up into 2 parentheses. And I'm going to put a plus sign between the 2 parentheses. I'm going to put that middle sign with the third term. My GCF is 4x squared. And I'm left with x minus 3. My GCF is a negative 2, and I'm left with x minus 3. You have to end up with the same thing in the parentheses if you're factoring by grouping. Okay? We put the GCFs together. 4x squared minus 2. And then we bring down the common parenthesis of x minus 3. And this is our answer. Okay, now there's an equal 0. So we need to factor through grouping. I put parentheses around the first 2 terms. We always put the plus sign in the middle. We keep that middle term, or middle sign with the third term. We take a GCF out, x squared. I'm left with 4x minus 7. Here I can take a negative 4 out to create that same 4x minus 7. When you take the negative 4 out, it changes both signs. We put the GCFs in one parenthesis and we drop this parenthesis down. Now, we want to factor completely. Look for difference of 2 squares. X squared minus 4 can be x minus 2, x plus 2, 4x minus 7. That's factoring completely. And then you set each one equal to 0. And you solve to get your answers. Here we get x equals 2. Here we get x equals negative 2. And here 4x equals 7. My x equals 7/4. So here, we are factoring normally. The only difference is it's x to the 4th, not x squared. So when I factor this, it's going to be 2x squared instead of a 2x. And an x squared instead of an x. The factors of 35 I'm going to use, I'm going to go plus 5 here, and I'm going to go minus 7 here. 2x squared times negative 7 is negative 14x squared. 5x squared and negative 14 and a 5 is our negative 9 in the middle. That's it factored. You're done factoring. Now we need to set each parenthesis equal to 0. This is where it's a little more challenging. 2x squared equals negative 5. X squared equals negative 5 over 2. And when you take the square root of negative 5 over 2, it's this. Plus or minus I root 5 over root 2. You have to rationalize that denominator. Root 2 over root 2. So the answer is plus or minus I root 10 over 2. You do need to rationalize. That's not optional. The second one's a little easier to deal with. X squared minus 7 equals 0. X squared equals 7. When I take the square root of both sides, it's simply plus or minus root 7. If I were to put that in the Desmos calculator, this graph would cross the x-axis at root 7 and negative root 7. it doesn't cross representing the imaginary numbers. That's why they're imaginary. Okay, because it's not crossing the x-axis, therefore it's not a real solution. So, here, my factors of 36 that combine to be a 35, x squared minus 36, x squared plus 1. Be very aware, you cannot factor a sum of two squares. There's nothing you can do with that. You can factor a difference of two squares. X minus 6, x plus 6, x squared plus 1. And now we solve for our zeros. X equals 6. X equals a negative 6. X squared plus 1 equals 0. X squared equals a negative 1. When you take the square root of negative 1, x equals plus or minus I. The square root of negative 1 is I. So it's plus or minus I. Those are your four answers. And you should have the same amount of answers as the degree of your problem. Okay? We're just looking to factor a little more. Okay. This becomes x to the fourth minus 16, x to the fourth minus 9. Now what we need to recognize there is those are two differences of two squares. This becomes x squared minus 4, x squared plus 4. X squared minus 3, x squared plus 3. And I have one more difference of two squares. X minus 2, x plus 2. The other sum of two squares I just have to leave. X squared plus 4, x squared minus 3, x squared plus 3. You can only factor more if you have a difference of two squares. 16 and 9 are two squares, so I can factor them more. 3 is not a perfect square, can't factor it anymore, but 4 is, so I can factor that a little bit more. And now we set each of these equal to 0. X minus 2 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0. X squared plus 4 equals 0, x squared minus 3 equals 0, and x squared plus 3 equals 0. So x equals 2 is one answer, x equals a negative 2 is another answer. X squared equals a negative 4. The square root of negative 4 is plus or minus 2i. X squared equals 3, plus or minus root 3. And then finally, x squared equals a negative 3, which when you take the square root of it, becomes x equals plus or minus I root 3. So those are your 8 answers. 2, negative 2, plus or minus 2i, plus or minus root 3, plus or minus I root 3. Factoring using synthetic division. What number makes this divisor equal to 0? 6. That's what goes in the box. 2, negative 15, 9, and 54. Bring the 2 down. That's 12, negative 3. Negative 18, that's a negative 9. Negative 54, and there's our 0. So now we need to factor the depressed equation. That factors 2x plus 3, x minus 3. And we bring down the x minus 6. That's a third factor. You should have the same amount of factors as you have degree, or whatever the highest degree is. And then my zeros are what these are when they're set equal to 0. Negative 3 halves, 3, and 6. 3, 16, negative 37, negative 14. Drop the 3, negative 21, we get a negative 5. Positive 35, we get a negative 2. 14, we're at that 0 again. So 3x squared minus 5x minus 2. When I go to factor that, 3x and x. plus 1 minus 2, and I bring my third factor down of x plus 7. My zeros, negative 1/3, 2, and negative 7. What makes each parenthesis equal to 0? So in this case, what we're trying to do is find the missing coefficient if we know that x minus 3 is a factor. So if x minus 3 is a factor, I put it in the box like this. And I put down that coefficient as a k. Now here's what I do. If something's a factor, it means the remainder has to be 0. Which means, what does this number have to be? Not 15, negative 15. What times 3 gives you a negative 15? Negative 5. Okay, 3 times negative 5 gets you this negative 15. That gets me to 0. Now I work from the front. I bring the first term down. It's 2. 3 times 2 is 6. Negative 15 plus 6 is negative 9. And negative 9 times 3 is a negative 27. So essentially my k is, what plus negative 27 would give me the negative 5 I need? K minus 27 equals a negative 5. So my k equals 22. And that's our answer. So once again, we work backwards to this point and forwards to this point. It's a factor, and you have to be told this is a factor. You're told this is a factor. So you have to have a remainder of 0, which means this has to be negative 15. What times 3 gives you negative 15? That's negative 5. Bring down the 2. 3 times 2 is 6. Negative 15, 6 is negative 9. Negative 9 times 3 is a negative 27. Okay? What plus k will give me a negative 27? And it's 22. If you wanted to check your work, just plug the k in. And it should work out for you. So if I wanted to check my work, I drop the 2. 6, we get negative 9. Negative 27, we get a negative 5. And negative 5 times 3 is negative 15 is 0. So I know I must be right. It's the same thing on the next factor. It's a factor, so negative 2, 1, 9, k, and negative 56. I need a 56 here to get the 0. What times negative 2 gives me a 56? Negative 28. 56 divided by 2 is 28. So negative 2 times negative 28 is 56. Bring down the first term. 1 times negative 2 is negative 2. 9 and negative 2 is 7. 7 times negative 2 is negative 14. So this column right here, k and negative 14, have to go on to be negative 28. K minus 14 equals a negative 28. My k equals negative 14. That's all it is. Now, when I put that number in, 1, 9, negative 14, negative 56, drop the 1, negative 2, we get 7. Negative 14, I get a negative 28. Negative 28 times negative 2 is 56, and we get that 0 back, so I must be right.